This is a picture of the exterior of the now closed Nova Express Café, which is a science fiction themed restaurant in Los Angeles. It also had a lot of sort of cultural events, kind of poetry readings and music acts that would play there. It's pretty small, so it was a very intimate setting, and people have a lot of fond memories of that. And I am making a documentary, but don't get too excited. It's not a documentary about the Nova Express. It's a documentary about something very narrow, which was flyers that I made for bands at the Nova Express. So it's really a documentary of my progression as a graphic designer from using a $50 drawing program called RealDraw Pro, which is the thing that I had back then, and to today, where I certainly know a lot more about graphic design. But it may intersect with something that would interest other people, so I decided I would make it kind of a crossover where I threw in enough information that if you were someone who went to the Nova, maybe you'd want to watch this anyway, or maybe not. It's up to you, but perhaps someone would find it interesting. So I try to keep it for a general audience instead of just people who would care anything about me. So I looked up the Nova Express on Wikipedia. They had a page, and I actually edited it, and I deleted a lot of stuff off of it. But one quote I did keep, and someone might eventually edit this out, was one that I thought was kind of part of what moved me to be involved, if you would, which was something that Carey said. He said, I believe the humanizing benefits of art are profoundly important, and I also think there should be just more art in the world. My hope was to present art under conditions that were open and direct as part of what it would mean to live in a more open society. Nova Express Café was meant to illustrate how art might function in a more democratic, evenly distributed, and less exclusive way. So that less exclusive part, and just kind of making people who had other jobs feel a little bit like a rock star for a day, I guess that idea drew me in a bit. So my involvement came by way of Lisette Sutherland, who was the one bringing in musical acts on Wednesdays, a lot of them experimental, just kind of really eclectic mix of acts and performance art. And I really was starting from ground zero. Now, I drew this little lighthouse, but that took a while for me to get up, to work up to. And you can see when I started, she kind of told me, well, here are some colors I like, and here is a font that I like, and here's a picture of me that someone drew a while ago that I think represents me. And so I tried to juxtapose these elements in various ways, and as I was learning how to use the program, and not really coming up with anything that I thought was all that great. Maybe sometimes you should just take a step back, and in my case I did that, and it came from a dream. Actually, I had this dream of a little gesticulating lighthouse character. It would be anthropomorphic, and its head would be the dot of the eye. And so I just went to the drawing board and started getting very mathematical about it and putting it together as a design, and came out with something that I feel is pretty good. I could go back now and certainly I make some changes to typography, and there's a lot of stuff I might do differently, but it has pretty good balance and color, and I think that little lighthouse who fits inside of a golden rectangle and has an equal number, an equal amount of positive and negative space, worked really well in silhouette. And so you'll find that figure on all of the flyers. I'll start with one of the repeat players at Nova who was there during the time I was there, and I thought what he was doing was very cool. So I'll kind of highlight him as a start. His name is Andre LaFosse, and he is a loop guitarist. So he walks into the room with some machines, some little computerized guitar pedals, but he doesn't have like backing tracks or beats or anything that he plays to. He generates his own backing tracks, and this is a style of kind of one-man band that there are a lot of people who are doing these days. But his difference is that he really does kind of glitchy stuff. I'll let you listen to how he assembles it, but you can see he puts together harmonics and things like that. So I did some flyers. Let's just watch from his YouTube channel. So there's a setup time kind of between songs where you're kind of watching the setup, and it hasn't quite become music yet, but he builds up to that. Now you'll notice this video that he has here, it's not at the Nova Express. There aren't really much in the way of good photographs or good recordings of anything at the actual Nova Express. It's very dark, a lot of black light, hard recording environment, also very small. You couldn't, if you were recording, you would be in the way. So pretty much if you want to know about the artists, you have to kind of go to other sources, web pages, things like that. So this first flyer I made for Andre coming to the Nova, I had this idea of a electric guitar where on the surface were just some components that would look like they were in positions that guitar parts would be, but they'd be electric circuit diagram things like resistors for frets, and it's kind of an interesting idea. So I just found some little symbols and stuck them on there, and this wasn't a good program for going in and doing drawing, especially not vectorizing things like that and then cleaning it up on grids. So you're kind of at the mercy of the bitmaps that you brought in and resizing them and trying to make it look okay. And I think it's not bad. It certainly would be fun to kind of go over and do a really good version of that. But just doing some basic things in cleaning it up, like taking out the like there's this kind of glow on it at the up on the upper right, and that thing on the top of the fretboard, which doesn't really make any sense why it's there, other than that was the graphic I used to get these spirally things in the background that I was using for the pattern. I then kept the original thing in there, but it looks better without it, and just keeping that in the background, and also looks better without the picture. I think that just too much to look at and less is more, which is a good premise of graphic design to be thinking about. So I did clean it up and get rid of some of the distracting, unnecessary orange. And a funny story about this picture and is that these flyers were things that were being done like maybe a week in advance before the show, and they weren't being printed. They were just kind of things to on a website, and so there wasn't a lot of time to talk to people, and most of the things were just built out of stuff off their MySpace pages or whatever the band page was. And so I thought it needed a photo, and this was kind of the photo I wanted to use. But in the actual picture that Andre had on MySpace, it was like it didn't have a shirt on, and so I drew a little shirt on him there, and so that was just kind of funny. Query game, it's like, hey, you drew a shirt on me. It's like, yep. And he has a sense of humor, so that kind of thing is probably okay. But if one is a professional graphic designer, you probably shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. So I'll come back to Andre in a second, but first I'll mention another looping artist. This is the Gray Man, and he had this picture on his MySpace, which I had these 3 colored variations of him to try and, I guess, show 3 different, very diverse sides as a way of saying just how eclectic the actual act was. And so there was looping of chanting and beatbox and just playing acoustic guitar, and so a lot of different things, a variety act, I guess. And I managed to find a recording of something where it's called cello, and I'll just play a little bit of that. So this is just one of the kinds of things he would do. And like Andre, he's looping, so he's got a tablet computer on stage there running Ableton. This was way before iPads and things like that. So this is another one where I'm going to show you kind of the one that I did in 2006, and then the one that I did when I kind of came back to touch it up to put the archive together, and kind of the corrections. One thing is that the background before, I used to kind of look around for things and play with effects, and here I wanted to get this kind of gray image in the background and process it so that it could kind of bleed into the back. And coming up with positions for things, I was starting to kind of think about how wide something should be and where the connecting points were, but not really. And so you see the one on the right where it has, you know, more of a structure, a grid structure to it, and a natural placing of things. And also, did it really need that fourth picture? We've already got 3 pictures, and so adding another photo is just noisy. Small details like that little corner of the shirt, I'll talk about this kind of issue again later. If you can't edit that sort of thing out, then you have like a little piece of noise. There's also a problem in that I didn't have any control over sizing the heads in the photos, but I also changed the green a bit just to kind of make it look like it went in this more kind of with the shades of the red and the yellow. So what I was presented with kind of here, and when I wanted to use this picture, was kind of a Photoshop-like task of editing out this symbol from the middle of some photographs that were glued together. But RealDraw just wasn't up to that task very well. It didn't have good selection and pixel precise editing abilities. It could do very coarse things. And so I want to just mention that as a general graphics point, that a lot of times a tool, even if it's kind of clunky and it has a very arcane interface, I think a lot of stuff in Photoshop is still very arcane, that ability to get in there and have control and put things where you want it, that's what you really ultimately need. You can't use a tool that doesn't have like pixel precise locations for vector points, and you can only move the vector up or down in increments that aren't at the same as pixels. So that is something to bear in mind. So here's another flyer. Not a whole lot to say about it. Kind of less is more, just trying to take a couple of things, put them together. Not too big a deal. But the funny part here is that there had been some talk and small inklings that we might, Lisette and Troy and I might play and had a band based on our initials, BLT. And so I put a little sandwich on there, which I thought was funny. And it still is kind of funny, but it never happened. So, oh well. And speaking of funny little jokes that are in my flyers, this was one where the 2 loop artists of Troy and Andre were gonna played the same night, and I was pretty proud of the design on this one. That I took this old picture from the patent for a polygraph, and I kind of expanded it out and put it in to this format because it was something that I was thinking of when I was thinking of their looping in their music. And so I was really beginning to experiment with a better kind of less trivial designs, I guess you could say. So I didn't really have to touch this one up. When I went back over the flyers, I did a little bit, but not very much, because it was pretty good as it was. The only way to make it better would be to really sharpen up the polygraph and do that stuff. But it was a lot of work just to get it to do that from the drawing. And so the funny part here is that I've done it to Andre again. I used that same picture, and this time I used I just duplicated Troy's shirt on it. But it's kind of interesting because it's about looping and repetition, and to have them kind of looping, the shirt being looped, I thought was funny. But then, so of course Andre's like, "You did it again." Yeah, yep. But it's funny. I think it looks really good. That's my personal opinion. So and it's got little infinity symbols in places where you would have two O's, like the two O's in Hollywood. It's like a looping infinity and 8 o'clock, and putting the year on it and having the infinity symbol. So you usually wouldn't put the year on it, but in that case you throwing it in order to have another chance to put the looping symbol. So I think it came out nice. Now here's a very cool act that you actually can find a Nova Express video or two about, which was a painter, Norton Wisdom, who would come with a band called Magic Box, and he had a very particular painting act where he would take this big lit sort of screen that he could wipe off with a sponge, and it would create dribbles as he would draw one painting, and then he would start sponging away parts of that and then use the dribbles as inspiration to make the next thing. And it's all very glowy because it's done on this lit board. So you can go look at the gallery on Norton Wisdom's website and see the outcome of this process. He steps back and takes a photo of pictures that he thinks he might want to make prints of, but then he just turns right around and takes the sponge and washes them away again. So that's kind of how his stuff works. And I hadn't seen it before, and I was kind of making the flyer more for the band, and his Norton Wisdom's name is in very small print, whereas I now, had I known more about it, I would have definitely wanted to work with putting his name pretty big, and not that Magic Box isn't a big part of it, but I think that certainly the live painting is what draws the crowds. And so I didn't, in kind of going and correcting it, I felt it was doing a disservice, and I deleted off the Norton Wisdom pictures. I hadn't really invested in it, but it would be fun to go and try and make a flyer with his paintings, and if I had an infinite amount of time, I would probably go do that. But here I just went and corrected kind of typography and this kind of strange blur that was going in between the art, because I'd taken this picture of them standing in front of art, which is may well not be Norton Wisdom art, and kind of modified the picture so that it was using a texture in the background that wasn't the actual texture in the art, but something that I could continue down into the rest of the flyer, and trying to make that transition a little cleaner, and then doing a quick typography as a rethinking of how I would do that idea. But if I was going to do a Norton Wisdom flyer, it would be entirely from scratch, totally new kind of graphical concept and typography and all. So here was one of those, just a flyer on the left that I made in, I don't know, probably a rush one day. Just like, I've got a few minutes. I'm going to just take these things from this band's website and just put them on there and make it look kind of like a flyer. And so when I went back and I was just putting together a little collection of some of the flyers that I'd done, I looked at this one and I was just like, oh, that's just so lame. And I thought, what kind of, just asking myself that question, what would I do these days? What kinds of things might I try? And certainly that picture of the where he's holding the candle and has that color to it, that I, going from that kind of dark to this like kind of tan color, it just doesn't really, isn't very useful. So I went and looked for some candles that like pictures to kind of put him in an environment that with something that kind of looked like it matched. And so I got those off the internet, and then I stuck those in there, and I said, well, what if I took that pattern, I actually kept the pattern that I had used before, and then I turned it very dark in the background, and then I lit up the letters. And it's just a sort of a quick, the kind of graphic design criticism I would give to somebody. Now, this isn't a very fair one to criticize because I really just was like, okay, flyer, done. I looked up Soraya, and it's interesting because I was wondering if he had any YouTube videos. He does, including one where he goes on America's Got Talent and just gets booed off because people don't, I guess the American audience doesn't care much for polypantheonic throat singing. And this is what it's like. So that was what it sounded like, but it was also like costumes and sort of a theatrical production, and it didn't go over well with America's Got Talent, but it had also kind of made the Nova Express owner nervous because he thought it might be an ancient curse, so he had to cleanse the Nova with incense to be sure it was not cursed. But I don't know, it was pretty cool. So this band was called One Trick Pony, and what was particularly interesting, I thought, about the music, besides being, generally pretty competent, it was that the drummer played a box, like brushes and things on a big cardboard box, and it sounded pretty good. So goes to show you that you don't need a whole lot of equipment to do a good song. So I found this file in an incomplete state. I don't know if it ever got used. What I was doing is trying to take their album cover, this kind of heart with a building on it in flames. It was sort of sketchily drawn, and fit it into a flyer with some textures, and I think that came off pretty well. But the shapes are interesting. I think the shapes of the areas on the flyer are good. And that little logo that I drew, I think it may be a little too literal because it has a pony in it, but still I was just tinkering with typography and wanting to get better at that. So I think it's okay. I don't think a band really needs a logo over the long run, so kind of a different design space. So this band was called Cota, C-O-T-A, and they were like sonic sorcerers. That's their tagline, and so kind of some old world kind of stuff, chanty, but it's kind of different. You can go check out their website. And they came, might be good tour partners for Soraya, this sort of old world kind of music. And I don't remember if they actually used an upside down T or I did that. I can't imagine I would do that if they hadn't already done something like that. And I think that that face graphic was something that they had somewhere on their website. And so I kind of built this kind of branchy looking thing around it, and then integrated the little logo of the lighthouse character into it, because I was always trying to find an interesting way to do that. And I think this one came out pretty well. I didn't really have to fix it at all. It was also one of the later ones that I did. An interesting story about this flyer, however, is that I found it on I don't remember what I was doing, but like maybe I was looking them up or doing some kind of search, and I found on a Google Images search, I found the image of this flyer, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what is this flyer doing on another site? And it was some kind of spam harvesting thing where the word Cota means something in like Italian or whatever language the spam thing was in, and it was just inauthentic text, like intermixing different just text with pictures, and so it would have an essay that was about starving children in Africa, but then it would have an embedded video of Toto's Africa music video, and it would have all these other things with Africa, but it was designed to look it seemed it was designed to look like a template of a real site. So that's a funny story about this flyer, that it's spam in some universe. Okay, so the 48-hour film festival, this is not a music thing, this is a movie thing where you have to make a movie in 48 hours, and they had their after party at the Nova Express and screened some of the winning entries. And I started, when I made the original graphic, the one on the left, I had just taken a header off of a 48-hour film's website and kind of extended it. So getting some practice at doing that. But looking at it with a critical eye, like I was doing with all these flyers before I was going to kind of put them, burn them on a DVD and set them aside. Just noticing things like the print just being way too small, definitely should have been larger. And so, also the contrast, working more with that to have white on orange text and break up the space a little better, which I did as just an example of kind of an improvement I might throw in. And there's a little bit of orange, of that orange circle in the lower left-hand corner where I've taken the 48-hour film website stuff and mixed it up with Nova stuff. And there's no reason for that little orange corner to be there. It's just kind of a noise, and that's what you learn with cropping things in photography and just kind of trying to not have things there that will distract from the picture. It makes it much easier to kind of take in the aliens without it. So just a few little minor changes there. Interestingly enough, I never did the 48-hour film project when I was in Los Angeles, but I did do it in Austin when I moved away. And our team came in first, not necessarily because of anything I did, but just it happened to come in first. So I did mention that these things happen every week, and it was like people we didn't know anything about necessarily, because you book them and then they come, and it's a kind of a experiment. And this guy was kind of a comedian. He I don't know what his real name was, but he pretended to be an international pop star who grew up in a small village, and so his character had risen to stardom and was now coming over to the United States to grace our presence. And it was pretty funny. So it had this kind of colorful thing on his website where it was this guitar and pants and some papyrus font, and I didn't have really any ability to get rid of that. And I thought, well, that's good enough. And these weren't being printed at this time, so I guess whatever reason that time I didn't do much with it. But the modern me looked back and said, oh, what could you do? And so I took the letters out and thought of a interesting kind of way to lay out the flyer. And I thought, hey, that's just an example of how much more I think about it and how quickly I can do this kind of stuff now. And so, yeah, that's that. This was William C. Harrington, who would come, and he had a lot of different kind of instruments he was working together, like it mentions there, glass salad bowls, kind of doing some weird experimental music, and called it urban electronic music. And so at the time when I was trying to find all these different ways to kind of integrate the little lighthouse promo character that I designed into all these flyers somewhere, I got the idea of having like a street and using a sign maker. So I used a sign maker to produce that text, and then I modified the sign so that it had the lighthouse promo stuff on it. And in the original one, I just kind of made a mess and put mashed up some photos. And in the one on the right, the part that I was kind of interested in was sort of taking the work I'd done with the sign and that concept, which may not be the best way to promote him in general, but I was just looking at it from a graphic design retrospective, and I thought that it looked better to be cleaner like that. So I wasn't, undertaking any kind of giant redesign project here. I was just like, how might I make that look better today? And it only takes a little while. And so that's how I touched it up, and I think it looks better. So in terms of flyers that were not particularly ambitious, I guess this could be one of them. I had an idea, I guess, which was to do these kind of interesting lines for Darren Burns here. And going back and looking at it, I didn't really feel like doing anything major to improve it, but I did mess with the color a little bit, and noticing that really cheesy background effect on electric. I think he was going by the electric bassist, but I think that was his doing, or maybe it's something I came up with. I really don't remember, but definitely a very cheesy effect. And I, with a lot of these flyers, what I was doing is not so much, of course, redoing them, but just doing minor corrections and saying, well, if you're going to go with these LED segments, get that background off of it, and maybe move it up into the picture there, and don't have that red light right next to the your brown edges. But yeah, it would take actually a bit more work to have more of an idea than this flyer has. So
Vampire wombats. Vampire wombats. They don't want to hurt you, they're really quite friendly. Although they be undead, they're really quite friendly. When the batteries run low, they get kind of grouchy.
So that's the Tuxedos, and they would play a number of places in LA, including the Nova Express and Il Corral, another venue. And so they apparently made it to Dr. Demento, so big time of musical comedy. And here in this little flyer I didn't do a whole lot because I had this picture, very iconic, of the lead singer wearing the skull. And what I did do is I came up with this little typography, and then I was experimenting with learning how to do things like making the illusion of the text having a spotlight on it, which came out okay in this case, I think. And I also think the typography goes pretty well. Even looking at it now, I think it's not bad. It's, better than I think what they were using before. So another reason I played the Robot Vampire Wombat song is because that I had heard the song and I thought it was pretty catchy, and that it would be good to put a Robot Vampire Wombat on a T-shirt. And so I drew this little thing of a robot, a vampire, and a wombat out of these circles with semicircles on them. And he didn't really like it because he said, well, it really is a robot vampire wombat. It's all those things. It's not three separate things. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's a play on it. It's like, here's robot vampire wombat. But apparently that didn't go with the vision. So here it is. I still think it's pretty cute.
When we became lovers anyway, I'm looking for an older, uglier woman. I'm looking for a older, uglier woman.
Okay, so definitely continuing here on the comedic side, there were definitely some people who were pretty funny in various ways who performed. And this was Brian Kenny Fresno, who was from Fresno, and he had a number of stories. I don't know how many of them were true, but I can imagine many of them were, like the story that he applied for an arts grant and got, like, I don't know, some small amount of money from the city at one point, and he got $100 or some amount of money that he turned around and he spent on pornography and beer, and then he considered that his art. And then I think that after a string of various things, he says he was like banned from Fresno, and he could have just made all that stuff up. I don't know. And this one is an interesting one. I didn't really know if I was gonna touch it or not. It said he had this cult sign-up form, and you could state your level of devotion to check 1. Were you a poser, a devoted disciple? A devoted disciple will volunteer services A devoted disciple will volunteer services, donate organs, and seek a place of honor at BK Fresno's Big Fun Funeral. And I just kind of threw it on there. And the thing is that when I looked at it, I was just looking at these flyers and trying to put them into some kind of final form. I couldn't really think of any way to take this that didn't involve some kind of new, crazier design. Like the things that I might have tried to do is I sort of wanted to pull the visual elements apart a little better. I realized that better was worse with him, and so I would have to sit down and start doing something crazy and worse, and it would have to be new. I think I'd have to be doing something fresh. So I just kind of left this one, and that's a good thought. Something that I might try sometime is to do something really funny and eclectic that still holds up as a graphic design. So I should look for examples of that. I'm not really sure what would be a good example. So this was someone who went by the name Bacon Tears Up Business, which is a pretty funny name for a band, if you ask me. And a notable point there is that I actually also joined in and played. I found out they had a lot of musical instruments at a artist complex by the LA River. Which is kind of popular because it's a place where you can go and you can play really loud all hours, but it's also very loud. And just had tons of instruments. They're ER doctor and had money to buy lots of crazy things like theremins. And I thought, oh, that's cool. So we had met to jam once and then said, well, we could play. We don't really have to practice the Nova. Just play something and make it not too abrasive. And so I brought my keyboard that I had at the time, and we just kind of sat there and played for a while. And there were some people who would come and play like things that sounded like whale sounds. So you really could do almost anything. And so definitely not a high rehearsal situation. I usually prefer doing sequencing myself, very meticulous. So it's hard for me to be that organic, but I tried, and I guess it worked okay. So before I go just talk about the flyer, I will point out that I had shaved what little hair I had at that time, left into kind of whatever mohawk I could manage, and then sprayed it with red hair dye spray that my roommate had. And it is one of the funnier looks, I think, in terms of pictures that exist of me. And so I also wore the dark sunglasses at the concert, so that was my band persona. I was borrowing a lot of art. The bacon that you see here comes from a website called Strip Creator, where you make comic strips, and this was one of the characters you could pick. And so I kind of thought that Bacon Tears Up Business, I double played on Bacon Tears Up because there happened to be a crying bacon, and I just kind of made comic panels that looked like that. And I integrated it with some other stuff. And I think this is actually pretty decent. I was just getting started in graphic design, and I had kind of moved from, beginner to intermediate, and this was me starting to get pretty good. The fork comes from a comic called Control-Alt-Delete, and I had kind of turned him into line art. Later, I drew my own fork that represents Hostile Fork, so that was just a angry looking fork that I found on the internet to use for this flyer. And yeah, but it still has kind of a good look, I think, as a flyer goes. I did not get a chance to make a flyer for Scott Huckabee because the little window of time when I was making flyers didn't overlap with him being there, but I did see him at the Nova Express. And it was just really incredible, in a level where I was like thinking, I don't think I should bother doing music because some people are just, connected with it in a way that I just am not. And you see this amazing kind of connection that he has. He like has this reinforced guitar. He fills it with beans and he shakes it, and it's like some kind of shaman from another dimension. And so you should definitely check this out. I'll kind of let it roll, and you can see what he does. And he just kicks his guitar and jumps around, and it's all like perfect. His timing is always on. The way he puts his hands on the guitar and hits the harmonics. It's just I really haven't seen anything quite like it, because he's definitely in a kind of a rapture. Like I say, I didn't get a chance to make a flyer for him, but I did after I saw him want to help him with his website. And so I kind of was looking at some of the art and some of the way that his website looked, and I thought, it could be, it just seemed like a very early kind of GeoCities animated GIF kind of web page that took a long time to load because it had a lot of old plug-in kind of things it was trying to load. And I thought, well, this could be a lot better. And so I drew some typography, and I kind of had this picture of a guitar, which was just kind of a concept of me trying to think of what kind of look might be more fitting. It was just an idea. But the typography is pretty good, I think. It's very organic, and I kind of started from something and then started moving it around to look like it was like alive, this kind of a very living typography. It's kind of dancing. So I think it's one of my better typography pieces. It's not totally mathematical. It's got more organicness to it. I mentioned this wasn't really a documentary of the Nova. It was a documentary of flyers, and so I'm just kind of taking those. So this band, I don't know if they ever actually played at the Nova. I can't say they didn't, but I also can't find evidence that they did. I don't remember. But they were certainly part of the group. I'll show some flyers that I had from them. Now the audio recording on the live video that I could find wasn't very good, so I took one of the songs that they had that I liked and put it together with the video there, just so you could sort of put a face to the sound. So they were pretty good. You can look them up. The thing that I learned most of all from making this flyer was that if you're printing on black, it's going to be very hard to read if you use gray print like that, and the back was very difficult to read. And it didn't look quite that dark on my monitor at the time, but unless you have a very well calibrated monitor, you should be careful with putting dark grays on blacks. I guess it sounds kind of obvious, but the front, I had this. There's this picture from their website, and thought it was pretty interesting. So I kind of was dealing again with not having Photoshop at that time. So I had to do some trickery to get a decent edit of it so that it could kind of integrate. And I tried to get the bow over the front of the fake sign that I made there, and there was this very kind of weird purplish kind of hue on it, so there's not a lot of control on the color. So definitely a lesson in flyer making. And then I'm trying to remember if these guys played the Nova Express or not. I never made a flyer for them to do so. But anyway, in revisiting this to do another version of it, just to see how I might clean it up, I did try to brighten it, and what was interesting for me in doing this was to try and think about how to put the information on and to edit the information. Like you can see how it says doors open at 7 o'clock and show starts at 7:30, but you're kind of working with the natural symmetries of trying to make the things be the right size so that it breaks it up without having to put lines around it. It was much easier to mess with the picture when I had Photoshop, but I kind of tried to make it stand out a little more. But again, you wouldn't expect me to be spending much more than a little bit of time to touch up an old flyer, so I didn't spend that long on it. But definitely working with the brightness, bringing up the color, getting rid of the purples, all stuff that's pretty easy to do now with Photoshop, where I didn't have that before. And I wasn't thinking about making a video out of this when I was redoing these flyers or retouching them a few months ago, but obviously every one of them I kind of look at and go, oh, what if I was going to actually attack the concept and totally redo it and take things that I took for granted. And this one I took for granted that their butterfly was going to be in it because it was the band logo. But even just looking at it now, making the video right now, I took the butterfly out and I think, that opens up space, and what could I do with that? So a designer friend of mine calls this concept kill your children, and they aren't really requirements coming from anywhere other than you put it in there. So there's a thought. And speaking of that butterfly, it was drawn by one of the guys in the band, and it has these embedded faces in it, which were kind of interesting. So when it came time to sort of make a t-shirt, I was like, oh, what if we just kind of pulled out the face and kind of did this design where I was like, okay, it could just kind of be a face that sort of trails off into nothing. And I thought it was kind of an interesting look at the time and made for a better shirt. The font is boring, but I guess it was just something done on short notice, and I was of the opinion, or starting to become of the opinion at that point, that using crazy fonts was tacky, and so I was invoking them less often. Before I'd seen the movie Helvetica, which has this controversy of whether you should, be using lots of crazy fonts or not. And here is Troy modeling said shirt, and also a picture of Lisette and I with the shirt as well. Somewhere around here I got a copy of Illustrator and tried working with that. This is a case of where for that show we wanted to, of all those people, I wanted to have a poster that could feature different artists on each one. So just printing with a cutout area and then putting the little color cutouts of people onto the black and white poster. And I thought the design came out pretty well, just in terms of how are you going to put that much information on one flyer. And so it's kind of, one answer is have different ones, and that was just a way of making them different and stand out a little bit by being strange. So this guy was a pancake juggler, Scott Neary. You can look him up, and he's just kind of a comedian juggler who, among things he juggles, are pancakes. So in a frying pan. So you can see that. And here I am packing some of these little kits, promotional kits for the band, helping out. And continuing, here is the last of the Drop Black Sky pieces I'm going to show you. And it was when they were playing this kind of well-known event called the Labyrinth of Jareth Fantasy Masquerade at it was at the Henry Fonda Theater, again, not the Nova. And I got this idea of taking these 4 pictures and kind of juxtaposing together and having them for each of the band members, and then working with the graphic from the Labyrinth of Jareth and kind of putting it in the corner, and then you notice that all these have the little lighthouse mascot in there somewhere, and kind of again, as I was moving along in here around 2006, I guess, getting better at having an idea of some kind of how to use the space and the shape and to create this kind of wispy thing that would bring some visual interest for that wave, the purpley wave. And I guess there's not really that much else to say about it other than, I went to that and I wore my purple wig that I had for many years and my mask. You had to wear a mask, but so there you have that. So I'll end the digression as well as I'll bring the video to a close with some closing remarks here with the Nova Express menu circa 2005, which some of you may remember, notoriously hard to read in the dark environment. And it's a little wave of nostalgia just to see it, at least for me, which makes me think about the urge that I would have now as a graphic designer to kind of go back and make it more readable and bring the print size up and rethink it another way. But that also that there's kind of maybe a cost to that. And when I showed these flyers, it wasn't so much to say that these are all really great flyers. I think some of them are pretty good, especially considering the tool I was using and the fact that I had no experience whatsoever. But that also, going back to Carrie's mission statement of the democratization of art, I think the fact that I was given the chance to do this and that we were, given the space to bring these acts in, also people who sometimes, were, maybe lesser known acts, that was kind of the charm of it. And I think it is something. It's a shame that the Nova Express closed, but maybe this kind of YouTube era of people taking their talents to the public, where you can find a niche, and even if it's a small one, that will keep going, and that we'll find more connections, maybe even with a small fan base, people you can talk to, people you can then invite to parties or things like that. So I didn't want to go back and do too much redesign, just enough to kind of do some basic correcting pens, but I've got copies of all the old and the new on a DVD that I'm going to send to people along with this video. So if you happen to cross it and if you found something to appreciate about it, then great. If not, I did warn you, it was a very narrow video, and so be interesting to see people tell some of the other stories. There were lots of other stories. They're just not mine necessarily to tell. So if you've got old Nova Express stuff, I encourage you to put it up on a blog or on a YouTube video. Thanks for watching.